Hi, welcome everybody. We're really glad to have you tonight. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint in a second, but first I thought it would be nice for us to introduce ourselves. And Deborah, I'll ask you to go first.
Good evening. My name is Deborah Fiasco, and I work for a special school district in the Parent Education and Diversity Awareness Program. I've been in this field for way too long to even talk about, and I am a parent of an adult who has a disability, and I've gone through some of these things with my spouse and with my parent. And so hopefully you'll get some information and some tools, and we're always here for follow-ups afterwards. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Deborah's got such a great combination of lived experience and professional experience. She just brings an awful lot to these workshops, and we're really, really happy to have her join us and work together on them. I'm Sharon. I'm the Senior Director of Family Support here at the St. Louis ARC, and I do not have a family member. Well, I have a brother-in-law with a disability, but his decision-making plans were set in place long before I hit the scene. I've been at the St. Louis ARC for over 30 years and really think it's really important that we talk about decision making for all people. Some of the pre-submitted questions were about guardianship, and so I want to be clear at the beginning of this workshop that we're really going to be spending our time today talking about how people can make as many decisions for themselves as possible with the type of support they need to be able to make those decisions. So if you're really anxious to know more about guardianship, we have pre-recorded workshops that we've already done with lawyers who can talk to you about other types of decision making, including powers of attorney, conservatorships, and guardianship. I'm hoping we can engage all of you in this conversation tonight. I can't see you, but in my mind, you are on the other end of your computer, maybe with a person who has a disability that needs a little bit of support or a lot of support with decision making, because we're going to really try and give you a chance to practice how to make some of those decisions and how to consider different ways to get some support. And I like to start off with this quote that was shared with me by Jonathan Martinez, who is a national expert on alternatives to guardianship. And it's an old quote from Jean-Paul Sartre. I am my choices. I cannot not choose. If I do not choose, that is still a choice. If faced with inevitable circumstances, we still choose how we are in those circumstances. And by golly, haven't we all been in that situation over the last year? So this quote always feels really powerful to me and reminds me that there are choices occurring all the time, regardless of what kind of systems that we've put in place. So I like to start off by really talking about why decision making is important. And a few of you I noticed on this meeting are Joyzen families, have attended our Joyzen workshop. This is notes I took at a Joyzen session with families once about what they wanted to see for their family members. What would be a great quality of life for them? And they wanted to see them employed and managing their money and having friendships and hobbies and all these really great things. In my mind, those things are much more likely to happen, and research supports it. Those things are more likely to happen the more decisions I make for myself, because decision making breeds positive self-image. It gives you confidence to move forward in your life. It builds responsibility because you're making the decisions that you need to go forward and take action. And so I look at this all the time. I keep this in my office and think about, how am I helping families to achieve the good life that they want for their family members? And sometimes that is by helping them figure out how to move the bar forward with independence for their family members, or maybe more importantly, interdependence.
So these are some of the common responses that people say about why they are thinking about getting guardianship. And more often than not, someone else is persuading them to do it, whether it's a teacher or a school administrator or a family member or a medical professional. We hear all the time that families say, well, I have to get guardianship. That's the next step. And my experience with parents over the years has not been that they want guardianship because they want to remove all of the civil rights of their child, but out of protection. They want to protect their child from being taken advantage of, or bad things happening. So it really does come out of a feeling of love for most families. But we're here to tell you that even if guardianship is the answer, and that's something that you and your family will discuss with your medical professional and your teachers, supported decision making is really an important component of life. So even if guardianship ends up being the answer, we think that supported decision making is an important thing. The thing about being told by your teacher, sometimes we do this in transition planning, is we start planning for the future and what's going to happen after my child's 16. It doesn't have to be the next step. You still attend the IEPs, you can still receive all of the information. It's actually an IRS law that allows you to continue to do that. And if there's ever any questions, from a family when they receive that transfer of rights, because at 18, your child is the educational decision maker. My phone number's on that transfer of rights letter that goes out from special school district, at least, that you can give us a call and we can talk with your teacher or other professional. But never think that you can't be involved with your child's decision making. They are the adult at 18, but it doesn't have to be all or none.
And we had a pre-submitted question, Deborah, about why don't they make the transfer of rights at 21, since people are staying in school until 21. But that's really a federal law for U.S. citizens, for all U.S. citizens, right?
Right. And so when they reach the age of majority, at 18, they become an adult. So one of the other questions was talking about becoming a guardian before the age of 18. You are your child's guardian unless you've gone to court for some other reason. So you are your child's guardian until they're 18. When they turn 18, they are considered legally an adult. So whether they're still in school or they're out in the workforce, at 18, they become an adult. The IRS rule that allows you to still be receive all of the information from the school is about that you're providing that care after the age of 18. So if they stay in school after the age of 18 till 21, you can still be involved, but they become an adult and they're the real educational decision maker. That's the thing about supported decision making, is if we can start doing it early, we have a lot more input on what's going on with our kiddos. So how do I make decisions now? And what is supported decision making? It sounds like this big thing, and it sounds a little scary to some people. Supported decision making is just somebody helping me make decisions. That's really all it is. When we make decisions as an adult or as a child, I many times will ask Sharon for her advice, or I'll call my sister, or I'll call my tax attorney, or I'll call. So we use people to help support us making decisions all the time. I think what's important about supported decision making, and when we're talking about our child, is to be very purposeful in helping your child know what decisions they can make, what decisions they might need support from, and who else could be the supporter, building that circle of support. So it doesn't always have to be me that's the person who's providing that support in the decision making. So Missouri Guardianship Law. Missouri Guardianship Law changed in 2018, and some of the practices in St. Louis County, if you live in St. Louis County, have changed as well. And it's been a lot of work on a lot of people's parts to both change that law and to change the mindset of the courts. Some of the big changes is that supported decision making has to be tried. That's one of the things that is included in the law. They want to go with the least possible impact on somebody's civil rights. So that's that middle one, that green, that supported decision making. Now, in Missouri supported decision making agreements, we have some that are available. That was the last slide that Sharon showed. And so we can give you some templates. They are not required by Missouri law, but it is required that we look at it. Some of the other things that changed under the Missouri Guardianship Law is that the person has to meet with their lawyer ahead of time. That would, to me, was really impactful, that I didn't realize that some people were meeting with a lawyer as they were walking into court to get a guardianship over them. They have to look at the management of the benefits for the responding and the trust and the trustee. There's some different reporting information that's required by the new law. Use of appropriate services or assistive technology. That's really big. And we'll look at the STAR later when we look at how we can support someone. Is there something with technology? Sharon and I have done this training for I don't know how many years, but time and time again, we found families that have found answers in assistive technology that they were saying, oh my goodness, I don't need to take guardianship. I don't need to go to court. I can build this into their day. I can put something in their phone that helps them in making these decisions. And it also allows for limited guardianship or conservatorship and retainment of rights. So now we can look at and have somebody who has a guardian still retain the right to marry, to vote, to drive a car. So that can be included in the guardianship. Now, it really always could, but St. Louis County wasn't really looking at it like that.
I really like that Deborah pointed out that we are starting to see the changes from this law that was enacted a little over 2 years ago, where you really are seeing our judges in our adjudication courts really asking these questions. We've had both of the judges from St. Louis County do presentations at the ARC where they've walked us through the courtroom so people can see what it looks like and not be nervous about what's going to happen. They will take a handwritten letter from somebody if they think that they're under a guardianship that's not required, and be willing to talk to them about whether or not they do have the capacity for making more decisions than they've had previously. And I just sat at a meeting this week through the Department of Mental Health. They have somebody at the Department of Mental Health that anytime guardianship is pursued, they go through the process to help the paperwork go through to the court system. And they are reviewing all of those at the state level now through the lens of the new guardianship law, including all the supported decision-making type of resources. So it's really exciting to me to see all those pieces in place. And I do want to reiterate what Deb said, in that you may determine that guardianship is right for your family member. That does not preclude that they can make some decisions for themselves, whether it's that they want to be able to have cream in their coffee in the morning, or they want to be able to wear certain clothes on certain days. We all make decisions for ourselves, and the more decisions we can make, the better quality of life in general that we tend to have. So this isn't just about people that are not going to get guardians. As we walk through these tools tonight, even if you're going to make some decisions for your family member, I hope you'll think about, how could I open up the door a little bit to having more decisions be made by my family member with feedback from other people that they value their opinions. So we're going to start and do some practice, do some activities where we do a poll, and talk a little bit about decision making. So there are a lot of resources on the Charting the Life course, LifeCourseTools.com webpage, and I'm going to open that up a little bit later. But one of the forms that we really like to use is the tool for exploring decision making. And that tool helps us think about whether or not somebody makes a decision completely on their own, like about deciding about the cream in your coffee, whether they need somebody to decide for them. You know, maybe it's just you don't even want to mess with your finances. You want to turn that over to somebody else that you trust, because really big financial decisions are overwhelming, and that's fine. You choose to pass that decision off. Or for most of us, what decisions are going to fall in that middle box where you ultimately are the decision maker, but you're going to want to get some advice from a friend, from a family member, from somebody else that's had a similar experience to you. And so when you get into the purple zone, that's where you can really start to get creative and think about how can I make that decision. So let's start off and just do a poll and play around with what kind of decisions that you all want to make for yourselves. So this first question is about you, whoever's sitting at the computer today. And we want to know what personal decisions are most important for you to control. And you can pick as many of these as you want. Do you want to control your health decisions, your financial decisions, things that happen in your daily life, like what's for dinner or how you're going to get to work, who your friends are in your spiritual life, where you go to work and what days you go to work, what hours, and then other kinds of decisions in life. What are most important? All right, everybody so far is really interested in money. I've gotten 5 responses. I want to keep giving you a couple minutes here to answer the questions.
When we look at all of these topics, these are topics that we, using supported decision making, actually teach good decision making. Because we don't always know how to make these decisions about our financial health or about our health. We need to learn how to make good decisions and how to recover from decisions that maybe were not the best. I don't always make the best decisions about my health. Sometimes I eat things I shouldn't be eating, or I stay up too late and I know I'm not getting enough sleep, or whatever else it is. What is the risk to me about not making that decision, and how do I learn from a good decision and a bad decision?
So in this first poll, looks like the very most important thing was daily life, that you guys want to be engaged in what's happening every single day, but all of them except for other are over 50%. So you really want, most of you want to be able to make some decisions about your health, your finances, your social life. So excellent. Now we're going to go to question number 2, and I'm going to launch that one. What decisions do you need or want to make for your family member? So when you think about your family member with a disability, are there decisions that you're most anxious about, that you feel that you most need to jump in and provide those supports to them? Is it health, finances? And part of the reason I'm asking this question is that I want you to think about what happens when you aren't able to make those decisions. I had a recent experience. I was without my own car for about 16 months. And at first it didn't feel like a big deal, but then it felt like every time I wanted to do something, I had to ask somebody else and make all these different kinds of accommodations so that I could get a ride. And it was so frustrating not to be able to decide when I wanted to leave the house and just be able to walk out the door. And I hadn't really thought about it. So there's things that when you give up decision-making control, you recognize how painful that can be and how difficult. No surprise, health and financial. And I think mostly that's because when we think about health and financial decisions, we think they carry the biggest risks. So the way I'm going to have you look at this today is to think about those other 4 areas: daily life, social and spiritual, and employment. And are there decisions that you're making every day that they could start taking more ownership of? Could they be doing more to plan their own social engagements? Could they be doing more to plan their daily schedule and get up on their own, or take responsibility for some of their own, their clothes, those kinds of things? So you can focus on the decisions that feel that they're less risky as you're building decision-making skills, because those things are still going to move forward and pass on. So I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about, we already kind of talked about what supported decision-making was, but I want to walk through it again. It doesn't have to be formal. Deborah and I are giving you a lot of formal resources tonight, but that's so that you can play around with these ideas. In the end, No, I don't have a plan. I just know in my head who all these people are that I'm going to turn to for different things. So when we say supported decision making, we're saying that the person is always at the center of the decision making, that at the end of the day, they're going to be the one to say, I want to ask Deborah for her help about this, or I'm going to want to ask mom about her help for that. They're going to have all their legal rights and be able to make decisions, but they're getting the help that they need. There are no legal fees because you're not setting up any kind of legal arrangement. It's a binding arrangement that is recognized in our law, but it doesn't require paper to do it. And that it involves teaching people about decision making and the details about their affairs. So, we have had people at the ARC with quite significant disabilities that have made very, very big healthcare decisions about cancer treatment, about surgeries. And they were the ones ultimately that made those decisions for themselves, but after very, very intensive support with their doctor explaining the information, and then us going back and re-explaining the information in a different way and providing some pictures, and then taking somebody to a support group to hear from some other people that had the same kind of health situation. So that kind of decision making isn't always easy. It can be time consuming, but I think that in the long run, folks felt very comfortable that they'd been able to make a decision for themselves with all the information that they needed. And even the National Guardianship Association recommends supported decision making. So I talked about this form before, and I'm going to actually close this PowerPoint and open up the form in its full page glory.
This is a great form. You might, if you're old school or you've been around for a while, or you came to a workshop a long time ago, we called it the stoplight tool because it was a red, yellow, and green tool. It's been modified, and the colors now represent all the colors that they use in charting the life course and the star and the trajectory and some of the other forms. But it was referred to as a stoplight tool. And it was really an interesting tool when they were developing it about I can make all of those decisions, or the yellow was yield. I can't make them all.
Okay. So this form is the same categories that I used in the poll. So it's going to ask very specific questions about daily life and employment, about healthy living, about social and spiritual, and some of these other areas. So I'm going to go to the healthy living section because that was an area of concern for people. Can a person choose when to go to the doctor or the dentist? Let me tell you, if my doctor doesn't remind me every year that it's time for me to schedule an appointment, I would have to say I couldn't do this for myself because I would forget. But there are plenty of systems that remind me so that I can be an independent decision maker. As long as I get a little postcard from my doctor's office or the nurse calls me to schedule the appointment, then I can do it. Do you decide what doctors that you want to see? And how do you know if your family members feel comfortable with the doctor they're in?
One of the ones that we get a question a lot about is medication. Can I decide about taking my own medication? And do I understand why I take medication? Those are two really big ones that we talk to families about a lot. Is sometimes absolutely their loved one is amenable and says, I will take my medication, but they forget. And so again, is there some technology that they can get support? So maybe they're not doing it completely independently, but you build on the strength of they're willing to take it. The one about drugs or alcohol, I love this story about a family who did get guardianship, and the medication that their daughter was on really called for not having any alcohol. But she worked in a grocery store, and when she got off work, they didn't ask her for her guardianship papers. They asked her for her driver's license, her non-driver's license, to prove she was over the age of 21 and she purchased alcohol. And the family thought, I really thought that because I'm her guardian, I was protecting her, but they never had those discussions. She didn't understand the importance of the medication she was taking, the reason for it, and why alcohol was prohibited. So these kind of questions really, we think, spark conversations with families too, that make for better decision making all around. That's just one example. So really doing it with plain language. This means written information is provided in simple words or pictures. We don't all communicate with words. And so however that communication looks, that's fine. To research and learn more about choices. And so when you're making choices about say retirement as adults, we do our research. We try and figure out which is the best investment for us. What do we do? The same is true for our loved ones in doing the research to try and figure out what are the best choices. Help them knowing what choices that you have. Sometimes it is a matter of, I remember giving my child choices. You can wear this coat or this coat. It wasn't, you can go out in the snow without a coat, or you could wear a coat. It was like this coat or this coat. So we've structured choice making most of their lives. And so helping them know what choices there are and what good choices are. Visits and trials means trying different kinds of choices to see how you feel and which one you like. So sometimes when we go to someone for some support, sometimes it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel genuine to me, or it doesn't fit in with my lifestyle or what my values are. So trying different things. Reminders are important, dates and times. We have found that using the smartphone for like medication reminders, or like Sharon talked about for her healthcare reminders, or financial, when you have your automatic bill pay and it pays all my bills for me, and then it looks like I'm a rock star and I'm on top of things. So those reminders about dates and times are important. Help in thinking about the pros and cons and really going through. Many times we're not talking about it's only this or this, that these are the choices, but really going through and saying, if this is your choice, then what are the ramifications? What are your responsibilities if this is a choice you make? And what are the natural consequences or the natural benefits, both pros and cons? And then having the supporter come to the meeting. When you're building these circles of support, having somebody know that they're the person who's going to provide the support is so important. And we've gone around rooms before and said, Sharon was talking about buying a car, and she definitely had people that she trusted because they understand cars. And there are other people, other friends, where she's like, I would not ask Deborah what it was. But if she just handed me her wallet, her credit card, her bank account, and said, Deborah, go buy me a car, I would be paralyzed. So it's that way with guardianship and supported decision-making too. Asking people, do you mind being the person who is a support, is often really flattering to say, Sharon, you know so much now about cars after buying this last car and doing all your research. Would you help me in buying my new car, and approaching her as a supporter?
Gosh, I'm so glad you said that. Not that I want to help anybody buy a car, but I think that's really important, that families often, I think, feel like it's burdening to invite people to come to have conversations, whether those are formal conversations in meetings or informal conversations. But most people, it's embedded in us to feel really honored when somebody thinks that we have something to offer to a conversation. So, test the waters with that. Even if it's your family member's friends, you know what? I get all kinds of great ideas from my friends. Some of them are good and some of them are not so good, but I appreciate hearing what they have to say. And I start with this slide a lot when I'm thinking about decision making, because when I know somebody, I sometimes have a sense the way this is written is just too complicated for them. But if I made it a little bit easier, they would do well. Or I just need to shift it all into pictures. I know we've got a mom on the call today whose son didn't want to have any interest in something until he went and visited to see what it was really like. And once he went and saw what it was like to go to a college campus, it changed his whole idea about making decisions around that. So I think that we know people really well, and you know your family members really well. So you're going to have an idea of which of these types of supports could be really helpful in moving the decision making.
So who are the people that you trust to help make these decisions? And again, it really is looking at who in your family can make decisions or help you make decisions or help your loved one make decisions. It's really important too to go through and have those conversations. I said I tell the story, my son has a cousin, a male cousin who is a nurse, and he feels much better talking to him about medical decisions because he's a nurse, so he has that medical stuff, and he's a guy. So it doesn't always have to be me. Looking through family members and helping them. It's not just a sibling. Friends in the community. Are there people at work or in their sports team or special interest places? I know Sharon's in a choir, and she relies on her friends from that community that she has built for a lot of things. Are there other places that you like to go, to a library or someplace or a place of worship? And then paid people. We always like to look at paid people last. School staff, support workers, support coordinators, maybe if you have a regional office coordinator, social workers or doctors or staff from other organizations, other advocacy organizations. Maybe they shouldn't be last, like the St. Louis ARC. These are all people that you can approach and set up as supports to make those decisions.
Yeah, and that's something that we are also offering training to folks on, building a circle of support. We have a webinar that's on video if you would like more information about how to do that. Deborah did that one with me as well, and I thought it went really, really well to hear a lot of the stories about how that works to kind of pull people in. But I do think that particularly when you're traveling from one environment to the next, thinking about people that you don't want to lose in your circle. You know, several of you in my group were talking about graduation, pending graduation, and who are the people within the school system that you might want to stay in touch with. You know, have them come over for a coffee or a soda one afternoon, 2 or 3 times a year, and just touch base about how things are going. I think most of us really enjoy maintaining those kinds of relationships. This is just another example, and I'm horning in on your slide, Deborah, only because this is mine. But this is an idea about how to look at layers of relationships from the people that are most intimately connected to you, like your parents and your spouse and your best friend, but then work your way out into those other relationships in your life and think about different components of your life. You know, Deborah talked about how she wouldn't be the person that I should turn to if I was going to need assistance with my car, but if I was going to need some assistance with healthcare or with government systems, she for sure would be somebody that I would want her opinion because I value that. So I might put Deborah over in my healthy living area where I might ask her to help me with some of those decisions. She's actually much better than me in managing healthy eating too. So I might ask her some questions about that. So you can kind of pinpoint around this circle people that you think make the most sense. And I'm going to give this back to Deborah, but I do want to tell a quick story because as you start to have these conversations, you don't know what your family members are going to say. And I just want you to be thoughtful and ask some open-ended why questions. Why do you think this person would be a good person to involve in conversation about this type of decision? Because I carry with me one of our very first workshops workshops, there was a lovely young man and his dad, and we were talking about financial decisions, and he said that he would turn to his personal trainer. And I immediately reacted to that internally and thought, oh my gosh, this is terrible. He shouldn't be going to his personal trainer to ask about money. But I was on it that night, and I said, well, tell me more about that. Why would you go to him? And he said, he's 26 years old and he owns his own business. So I think he probably knows a lot about how to budget and how to plan. And I thought, brilliant. That you're absolutely right and I'm wrong. And I bet you if he went to that guy and said, can you tell me a little bit about, tips that you've learned about how to manage your money, that personal trainer would probably be thrilled. So I always try and remind myself to not judge, not make assumptions, but to ask the whys of why do you think this is a person that you could draw into your conversations. And I don't know if Madeline's still on the call or not, but I listened to some of the conversations Madeline's self-advocate group has, and I think that they are an incredibly good resource to each other for problem solving.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how one of our members developed a whole training about how to stay safe at home that she performed for the group to help them learn. Another member created a whole training about how to manage your work and benefits so that you can retain your benefits when you go to work. So they're learning all kinds of stuff from each other. It's really cool to watch.
Thank you. I think we forget how much we get from our peers. And I bet you, if you think about who you've turned to in the last few months for decision making, you've got a friend who's had a similar life experience to you that's really been able to help you think about things in a different way. So those are folks that you should consider as you move through the decision making plan. All right, Deborah, I'm going to give it back. I apologize. Do you want to say anything more about this?
The only thing that I would add is I think one of the important tools as a family member too is to teach it backwards as well. And so while I might be helping my mother in making decisions, I'm really cognizant that I need to let her know that she helps me make decisions, and that we walk through some of those decisions with my other loved ones when we're working on some of these things. So it's not just one way, because everyone really wants to have worth and meaning. And so to tell my friends that they're worth something to me in decision making, or my family members, is an important step in teaching decision making and building that circle of support as well.
Deborah, as your son has become a grown man, are there things that you do turn to him for support and decision making about?
I do, and I'm really purposeful about doing it all the time now. My husband passed away, and so we were put into a position where the two of us had to make a lot of decisions, or I had to make a lot of decisions. And so I've included him. I don't always agree with him. I don't always take his advice, but I include him in the decision making so he can see the process about what we're looking at, whether it's a home improvement or it's money or work. I include him in those decisions because, again, he's learning how to make those decisions, and it feels much better to me to not make them all by myself. So we make a lot of decisions together, and sometimes we make the wrong decision, and then we talk through that as well. So.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you added that, because we all make mistakes and we all learn from the mistakes that we make. And so part of this decision-making practice is also going to be learning to be okay when a decision is made that's not the best decision, and learning from the consequences of that. Now, granted that you don't want that to be a decision where the consequences are life altering, but there's an awful lot of decisions we make, like whether we choose to get up to the alarm clock in the morning, whether we pack ourselves an appropriate lunch, all those kinds of things. We can face the consequences of those decisions and learn if we make a bad choice. So I think that's a really good point. I'm going to close this and actually open up the supported decision-making star on a big page. Deborah, can you start us off talking about what the star is?
So the star is about goal setting or problem solving. So in the middle, where the star is where you put that goal or where you put the problem. And then the 5 areas around the star is where you do some of that, there we go, where you do some of that problem solving about where these areas might help. So we're looking at the star for supported decision-making options, and we look at that top one as my favorite. Look at it first is that personal strengths and assets for supported decision-making. So we're looking at what are the assets of that person. Do they have good money management, or they understand the concept of money? Do they even know their own address? Do they have the ability to communicate? Where do you pull out the personal strengths from that person and build on that for whatever your goal or your problem solving is? Sharon, you want to take the next one?
Sure. We've talked at length about relationships, but there's all kinds of things that you can do in the relationship area to support decision making, from having a coffee conversation with friends and family to looking at things like a joint bank account. Frankly, I think no one should have their own bank account until they're 21. I know very few people. I made such a mess of my money when I was younger, and it would have been really smart for me to have somebody else assisting me with big decisions, so that if I tried to spend more than a certain amount, it would be require 2 signatures, so that my mom would have had to say, hey, if you do this, what do you think is going to happen? And we would have had to learn from it together. But you can also have relationships that have legal authority to help you in certain ways that are less intensive than guardianship. So you might have somebody that has a power of attorney for you for health care. You could have some formal supported decision-making. Those are all a kind of formalized ways to look at relationships.
Technology is a big one. I think we all learned through the pandemic. 2 years ago would never have thought that this is how we would be doing workshops. So technology has grown, and we see it really as a tool in problem solving. So when we're looking at supported decision making, can we use the smartphone as a reminder, or another way where they can use it as a computer? Just even the telephone checking in. I've fallen and I can't get up, for our elderly population. The same kind of things can be used, like a GPS enabling advice. I know a lot of people who have Find My Phone or tracking for their children. So there's GPS enabled devices and all kinds of things. There's personal safety devices. So looking excuse me.
I have to say this, Deborah, this is a reciprocal one too, because we had a gal in one of our family workshops where she used the Find a Friend app to see where her mom was at the end of a work day, because it made her feel more comfortable to be home alone, to see whether her mom was on the way home and know that where she was. So those apps can be used in so many different ways.
Absolutely. And then we've talked about it before, like the money management, online banking. Is it safer to use a debit card and to teach debit card use than carrying cash that might be lost? So these are just all areas of technology that we can be looking at that might be the answers to providing that support or help with supported decision-making options.
I do want us to add that the state of Missouri is officially a technology first state. If you go to the dmh.mo.gov website and type in technology first, they actually have some really good resources there that are sort of buried on the web page, but you can see like there's a click-through link to look at a smart home and see all the different ways they've embedded smart devices into a home to make it safer and more independent for somebody. There's videos of people that are using remote monitoring so that they don't have staff in the home, but they have an opportunity to talk somebody through a computer to check in. They have sensors on their doors and windows so that people know when something's not going right. So there's a lot of great resources there. And because we're a technology first state, it's a more likely to be funded service. So I just want to throw that out. The blue box at the bottom is community. So there's all kinds of ways that we can use our community for help, from neighbors keeping an eye out when your family member's walking from home to work or home to the bus stop, that you're taking advantage of financial advisors. The library has a ridiculous amount of information and resources available to support people. Who are the other professional relationships in your life that might be able to offer some advice, whether it be clergy or a doctor? Lots and lots of opportunities to use the same things in the community that we all use. Now that I'm older, I'm using AARP all the time because it's available to me and I can tap in all their resources.
So the green part in this whole thing about looking at how we problem solve is eligibility supports. And so like Sharon said, she's eligible for AARP. A lot of us are eligible for our health insurance because of the job of where we work. So eligibility is an important thing to look at. When we're looking at eligibility for state services and supports, though, we do know that there is our very often limited resources. So we want to look through and increase our eligibility in other ways. To look at decision making, is there a service coordinator that might help? Is limited guardianship, is that what is going to really be the right answer? With money management, sometimes we have representative payees. There's the ABLE account for saving money that your loved one might be eligible for, so that their benefits are not impacted. Personal safety, a personal care attendant, there might be some funding for that, or adult protective services through the court system. These are all things that you might be eligible for that we look at in supported decision making as well.
Before we leave this page, I just want to say that something that the Charting the Life course Nexus has added is an information sheet that accompanies this star to kind of explain in a little bit more detail what each of these things might mean in terms of decision making. So for example, a representative payee, if you're concerned about your family member's ability to manage their paycheck or their benefits money, you could become their benefits payee so that the money comes to you. They could agree to that without you becoming their guardian. They say, yep, I need to have somebody help me budget out my bills and then give me my spending money. And you can do that, and it's much less restrictive to the person because it's strictly about managing that one chunk of money, and you can change your mind. So if 3 years into it, if your family member's been able to learn about budgeting and managing that money, you can release the representative payee and they can manage their own money. So it's something that can be time limited. It's something that can be agreed upon between you and the person who needs support. And it's much less legally binding than a guardianship. So I think that form is really helpful because it really allows you to understand a little more depth. What does it mean when Sharon and Deborah say, I could use automatic bill pay? Well, one thing we didn't do tonight, and I'm going to encourage all of you now that you've sat through this hour and a half long session, is to go back to that star and think about one of the things that you were worried about in a previous conversation, whether it was about sex, whether it was about money, but think about the star. what is that person's personal skill set in this area, and what would you like to build? Because when we look at the star, we're not just looking at what we have, but also what we could get. So those are things to build towards, and work your way all the way around, because if you think about that specific issue, I think it's going to be really helpful. And you might have 20 stars, one about staying home alone, one about relationships. It could be all kinds of different things, but it's a great way to think through when you start to get anxious about something and want to address an issue and come up with some strategies. Before we leave tonight, we want to make sure Deborah and I have a chance to share with you where we got some of these resources. So lifecoursetools.com is the Charting the Life Course Nexus. And if you go to their library link and come down to life domains, there's an entire page around supported decision making. And so they have multiple forms related to thinking about decision making and planning for decision making. This is the form that I was mentioning before that talks about how could you leverage a relationship? How could you leverage a living will? Those kinds of things. So it's got tons of really cool tools on here. Here's a portfolio for healthcare decisions. I want to show you the supported decision-making form, because I think it's really important that you know you don't have to use this form, but this is a form that Deborah and I are on a coalition that has people, a consortium from across the state that includes lawyers and public administrators and school people and professionals from organizations and parents and people with disabilities. And we came up with a form because so many people just don't know where to start. So this might be a good place for you to start. So here is a sample form. Again, you don't have to, but you can. You'll notice the first thing on this form is that it says that it either is or is not legally binding. So if somebody has a guardian, this is not a legally binding document because ultimately the guardian makes decisions. Otherwise, though, it is recognized as a legal document. Deborah, would you like to talk about this next section?
I really, there's two different ones. There's ones that are open-ended, and then there's this one with questions, and it goes through and asks about these supporters may do these kinds of things. And you go through and say, I want them to be able to look at my health information, or they want them to help me make the appointments with my healthcare. It does two things. It's not completely comprehensive, maybe, but it gets you started in deciding about, I do need help with this, or this is something that I don't need help. It also has a place for what supporters may do and may not do, and then who the supporters are. And so that the supporters actually know that they're the ones who are going to help. So if Sharon was going to say, Deborah's going to be the one who helps me make my financial decisions, but she never tells me that I'm the person who's going to make that financial decision. And it comes to the time where she really does need the help. This form gives you that opportunity to really walk through these areas with your loved one and put some structure to it. You saw, as Sharon scrolls, the name of the person, the relationship, their email, and their phone number. So that it's like a living will or a letter of intent. You have that information about making those decisions.
Mainly it's because everybody has to agree, right?
Yep. And so it can't just be that I've decided that you're my supporter, and then or you're my child supporter in this area, and then you have no interest in doing that whatsoever, or understand that you are the supporter and what those supports are. This also helps with that HIPAA compliance that the families are worried about, that they won't be able to help make insurance health information or find out health information. And then as we scroll through, it provides help with FERPA, with making those educational decisions.
FERPA applies to college as well.
Thanks so much for everyone attending. If you have some more questions about guardianship or alternatives to guardianship and supported decision-making, go ahead and contact either us in Parent Education or the ARC, and we can get you more information or lead you to the people who can answer your questions. Because Sharon and I are not attorneys. We don't even play ones on Zoom. So we can't answer those legal questions, but we can help you maybe point you in some directions about where you can get that information or you can find someone.